Chapter 8, Part 2 of Fanny Herself. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Fanny Herself by Edna Ferber. Chapter 8, Part 2. Two conversations that took place before she left are perhaps worth recording. One was with Father Fitzpatrick of St. Ignatius Catholic Church. The other with Rabbi Emil Thaumann of Temple Emmanuel. An impulse brought her to Father Fitzpatrick's study. It was a week before her departure. She was tired. There had been much last signing of papers, nailing of boxes, strapping of trunks. When things began to come too thick and fast for her, she put on her hat and went for a walk at the close of the May day. May in Wisconsin is a thing all fragrant and gold and blue and white with cherry blossoms and pink with apple blossoms and tremulous with budding things. Fanny struck out westward through the neat streets of the little town, and found herself on the bridge over the ravine in which she had played when a little girl, the ravine that her childish imagination had peopled with such pageantry of redskin and priests and voyageurs and cavaliers. She leaned over the iron railing and looked down. Where grass and brook and wildflower had been, there now oozed great eruptions of ash heaps, tin cans, broken bottles, mounds of dirt. Winnebago's growing pains had begun. Fanny turned away with a little sick feeling. She went on across the bridge past the Catholic church. Just next to the church was the parish house where Father Fitzpatrick lived. It always looked as if it had been scrubbed inside and out with a scouring brick. Its windows were a reproach and a challenge to every housekeeper in Winnebago. Fanny wanted to talk to somebody about that ravine. She was full of it. Father Fitzpatrick's study overlooked it. Besides, she wanted to see him before she left Winnebago. A picture came to her mind of his handsome, ruddy face, twinkling with humor, as she had last seen it when he had dropped in at Brandeis' Bazaar for a chat with her mother. She turned in at the gate and ran up the immaculate gray-painted steps that always gleamed as though still wet with the paintbrush. "I shouldn't wonder if that housekeeper of his comes out with a pail of paint and does them every morning before breakfast," Fanny said to herself as she rang the bell. Usually it was that sparse and speckled person herself who opened the parish house door, but today Fanny's ring was answered by Father Casey, parish assistant. A sour-nosed and suspicious young man, Father Casey, thick-speckled and pointed of nose. Nothing of the jolly priest about him. He was new to the town, but he recognized Fanny and surveyed her darkly. "Father Fitzpatrick in? I'm Fanny Brandeis." "The Reverend Father is busy," and the glass door began to close. "Who is it?" boomed a voice from within. "Who are you turning away, Casey?" "A woman, not a parishioner." The door was almost shut now. Footsteps down the hall. "Good! Let her in." The door opened ever so reluctantly. Father Fitzpatrick loomed up beside his puny assistant, dwarfing him. He looked sharply at the figure on the porch. "For the love of Casey, you're a fool! How you ever got beyond being an altar boy is more than I can see. Come in, child, come in. The man's cut out for a jailer, not a priest." Fanny's two hands were caught in one of his big ones, and she was led down the hall to the study. It was the room of a scholar and a man, and the one spot in the house that defied the housekeeper's weapons of broom and duster. A comfortable and disreputable room, full of books and fishing tackle, and chairs with sagging springs, and a sofa that was dented with friendly hollows. Pipes on the disorderly desk. A copy of Mr. Dooley, spread face down on what appeared to be next Sunday's sermon, rough drafted. "I just wanted to talk to you." Fanny drifted to the shelves, book lover that she was, and ran a finger over half a dozen titles. "Your assistant was justified, really, in closing the door on me. But I'm glad you rescued me." She came over to him and stood looking up at him. He seemed to loom up endlessly, though hers was a medium height. "I think I really wanted to talk to you about that ravine, though I came to say good by." "Sit down, child. Sit down." He creaked into his great leather upholstered desk chair himself. "If you had left without seeing me, I'd have excommunicated Casey. Between you and me, the man's mad. His job ought to be duenna to a Spanish maiden, not assistant to a priest with a leaning toward the flesh." Now Father Fitzpatrick talked with no, you couldn't call it a brogue. It was nothing so gross as that. One does not speak of the flavor of a rare wine. One calls attention to its bouquet. A subtle, teasing, elusive something that just tickles the senses instead of punching them in the ribs. So his speech was permeated with a will-o'-the-wisp, a tingling richness that evaded definition. You will have to imagine it. There shall be no vain attempt to set it down. Besides, you always skip dialect. So you're going away, I'd heard. Where to? Chicago. Haynes Cooper. It's a wonderful chance. I don't see yet how I got it. There's only one other woman on their business staff. I mean, actually working in an executive way, in the buying and selling end of the business. Of course, there are thousands doing clerical work and that kind of thing. Have you ever been through the plant? It's incredible. Father Fitzpatrick drummed his fingers on the arm of his chair, and looked at Fanny, his handsome eyes half shut. So it's going to be business, hmm? Well, I suppose it's only natural. Your mother and I used to talk about you often. I don't know if you and she ever spoke seriously of this little trick of drawing, or cartooning, or whatever it is you have. She used to think about it. She said once to me that it looked to her more than just a knack. An authentic gift of caricature, she called it, if it only could be developed. But of course Theodore took everything. That worried her. Oh, nonsense, that! I just amuse myself with it. Yes, but what amuses you might amuse other people. There's all too few amusing things in the world. Your mother was a smart woman, Fanny. The smartest I ever knew. There's no money in it, even if I were to get on with it. What could I do with it? Who ever heard of a woman cartoonist? And I couldn't illustrate. Those pink cheesecloth pictures the magazines use. I want to earn money. Lots of it. And now. She got up and went to the window, and stood there looking down the steep green slope of the ravine that lay, a natural amphitheater, just below. Money, mused Father Fitzpatrick. Well, it's popular and handy, and you look to me like the kind of girl who'd get it, once you started out for it. I've never had much myself. They say it has a way of turning to dust and ashes in the mouth, once you get a good satisfying bite of it. But that's only talk, I suppose. Fanny laughed a little, still looking at the ravine. I'm fairly accustomed to dust and ashes by this time. It won't be a new taste to me. She whirled around suddenly. And speaking of dust and ashes, isn't this a shame? A crime? Why doesn't somebody stop it? Why don't you stop it? She pointed to the desecrated ravine below. Her eyes were blazing, her face all animation. Father Fitzpatrick came over and stood beside her. His face was sad. He stopped abruptly and looked down into her glowing face. He cleared his throat. It's a perfectly natural state of affairs, he said smoothly. Winnebago's growing, especially over there on the west side since the new mill went up, and they've extended the streetcar line. They need the land to build on. It's business. And money. Business! It's a crime. It's wanton. Those ravines are the most beautiful natural spots in Wisconsin. Why, they're history, and romance, and beauty. So that's the way you feel about it? Of course, don't you? Can't you stop it? Petitions? Certainly I feel it's an outrage, but I'm just a poor fool of a priest, and sentimental, with no head for business. Now you're a businesswoman, and different. You're joking. Say, listen, my girl. The world's made up of just two things, ravines and dump heaps. And the dumpers are forever edging up and squeegeeing up and trying to grab the ravines and spoil them when nobody's looking. You've made your choice and allied yourself with the dump heaps. What right have you to cry out against the desecration of the ravines? The right that everyone has that loves them. Child, you're going to get so used to seeing your ravines choked up at Haynes Cooper that after a while you'll prefer 'em that way. Fanny turned on him passionately. I won't. And if I do, perhaps it's just as well. There's such a thing as too much ravine. What do you want me to do? Stay here and grub away and become a crabbed old maid like Irma Klein, thankful to be taken around by the married crowd, joining the Aid Society, and going to the card parties on Sunday nights? Or I could marry a traveling man, perhaps, or Lee Cohn of the Golden Eagle. I'm just like any other ambitious woman with brains. No, you're not. You're different. And I'll tell you why. You're a Jew. Yes, I've got that handicap. That isn't a handicap, Fanny. It's an asset. Outwardly, you're like any other girl of your age. Inwardly, you've been molded by occupation, training, religion, history, temperament, race, into something. Ethnologists have proved that there's no such thing as a Jewish race, she interrupted pertly. Maybe. I don't know what you'd call it then. You can't take a people and persecute them for thousands of years, hounding them from place to place, hurting them in dark and filthy streets, without leaving some sort of brand on them, a mark that differentiates. Sometimes it doesn't show outwardly, but it's there inside. You know, Fanny, how it's always been said that no artist can become a genius until he has suffered? You've suffered, you Jews, for centuries and centuries.